Hi, I'm Ali Patterson, and welcome to this special edition of the Paytech Show. Today, we're going to be taking a bit of a deep dive look into e-commerce, fraud, and some of the opportunities and pitfalls within this space, which, let's face it, 2020 being 2020, has had a hell of a ride this year. Joining us today, we have Jukka from G&D and Fran from Klarna to find out a wee bit more around some of the elements of e-commerce that may be overlooked. So Jukka, first of all, very good to see you again. Thanks for joining us here today. We've got to talk a little bit around big holidays. I'm not just talking about Singles Day, red letter envelopes, Thanksgiving, Christmas, but all of them together, because there's a bit of an uptake in terms of e-commerce. What are typically the biggest fraud issues that banks have to deal with on the retail side?
Thank you, Ali. It is interesting times, so let's see how the Christmas will hit us in good or bad. There are different, of course, multiple ways to group the fraud. So I guess that there are as many definitions as there are so-called experts in this space. But one rather simple is to probably categorize them to that there is a card-related payments. Then there are fraud which is related more to the identity theft. And then there are things or fraud relating to telemarketing type of fraud. If you look the card fraud, there is a fraud which is related, of course, when you lose your card or it's getting stolen. Of course, then people can easily use that one to certain, let's say, payment transactions, whether it's a point of sales or on the online account takeover, and usually then there is a social engineering being used or phishing type of attacks, which are very common. And then there is, of course, the ways to actually copy your card skimming, which is very much related to MaxStripe cards, where you basically copy your MaxStripe data. And now there are also some attempts for so-called, shimming, which is then that you actually try to copy whatever you have on the chip card. So I think that these are the typical fraud cases that the banks and we as a consumer will confront.
Can you give us a bit of an insight as to how payments and e-commerce have changed over the last few months because of, well, the pandemic and subsequent lockdowns?
Yeah, I think Australia were one of the first to move into quite stringent lockdowns, shutting down retail stores relatively quickly, which really meant that those in and with the digital footprint needed to accelerate the ability to enable customers to continue shopping, sort of not knowing how long the pandemic was going to be, not knowing how long we would be in different stages, if you like, of lockdown. So what we've really seen is a massive acceleration into the world of e-commerce. Now, there are some amazing retailers that were already very digitally savvy with very strong digital programs that quite seamlessly shifted into gear. But there's a really large proportion that had to actually get down really quickly behind the covers, lift the hood and start making things work so that they could attract and continue to engage with their audiences in a very new and different way. I think there was a statistic that we saw that last week alone, more than 30% of Australians actually did a buy now, pay later transaction online, which when you think about sort of 12 months ago, there was only 10% of the Australian population that had actually done a buy now, pay later transaction. So what we've really seen in the time of the pandemic is a shift in user behavior as well. And I think that's come about from the fact that people are now at home, so they're able to explore new and different ways to pay. We've obviously had a lot of more mature audiences who typically shopped in store and have never really worked and played in the online sphere, who were thriving on how do I get my fix, or how do I get my perfume or my makeup or whatever it might be. And there's this whole new audience now shopping online as well, which is really exciting for the space. But I think the thing that was most fascinating for us is to see the response from so many retailers. And I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different retailers, and the common theme is very much, if we were in a good position, then what this has done is enabled us to accelerate having an even stronger position. And where we weren't in the position that we really wanted to be, it accelerated us to get to a place that we believe we need to be and to continue into the future.
we're seeing a huge demographic and behavioral shift in e-commerce. Now, older generations, they are sometimes not as tech savvy online. My gran will keep her card wrapped in silver foil, but still email me her credit card details, which is incredible. Is this influx of people not as familiar, is that going to create, for want of a better word, a perfect storm of e-commerce fraud this year?
Yeah. Look, I don't think we're going to see a perfect storm. I think that's probably a little bit emotional for the goings on, but I take your point. I think that, like you've rightly pointed out, older generations, and there are varying degrees of those. My parents are in their very early 70s, and my dad still thinks that the internet's going to steal anything and everything he possibly puts on there. So I buy for him online and use my credit card details because he's too scared to put them on. But I think what that really comes back to is us having to educate them and provide broader awareness to how to keep your information safe. It's not actually only about your credit card information or your personal information when you're shopping online. It's actually, when you think about my parents' generation, and I'm sure your nan's the same, she probably has one password for absolutely everything in her life, not realizing that, hang on a minute, if that one password is uncovered, all of a sudden her life's in tatters. So I think there's a big role to play in terms of education. But when we see sort of this behavioral shift, we mentioned earlier that one of the things we saw very, very early in the pandemic is all these new audiences shopping online. And I think what the pandemic has actually enabled us to do is earn trust and build trust from the older generations to know that this big blocks is actually not going anywhere. It's here to stay. It's great. It doesn't talk back to you, but it gives you information, hopefully, if it's doing its job, that is meaningful and relevant to you. And you can trust it as long as you're very sensible about how you do that.
All actually indicators, if you look this Singles Day in which has started in China, or then Black Friday, which we are all very familiar now, as well as the Cyber Monday, also that the number of transactions people buying online is going up. But at the same time, at least the statistics that I have seen, so they doesn't yet prove that, okay, also the number of fraud is increasing relatively to those usage numbers. It is increasing, but actually maybe less than anticipated. Well, there could be a lot of reasons for that one. Some of the fraudsters are also maybe getting more ready for this big bang now in the Christmas time. So let's see. I hope that the number of fraud is not increasing because this would have really severe consequences, especially these older generation customers, because they probably would stop using. Like I could take from my side, my mother and her experience. So she would do probably her first online transactions roughly around about this time. And if there will be fraud, I can guarantee she will never do online payments after that one. It is, of course, more difficult for the older generations to know also what they should expect or what they when they do online shopping. I mean, it's not that many people who are really educated that you should see the small sign in your browser address line that there is an HTTPS, for example, so that it's a secured, or that you can look the content of the site and the spelling, is it a proper local language or is it translated by Google, and so on and so on. So I think that there will be challenges on that one. But yeah, let's see how it goes. After Christmas, we probably know.
As long as we educate them, I don't think there's going to be any more risk than what we've actually experienced previously. If anything, I think that companies and platforms like ours and the fraud technology that exists in the world now with Riskifieds and Forters and businesses like that, they exist because fraud is something that people know is out there, and ultimately everybody, whether it's a retailer, a consumer, or a platform like ours, wants to protect each other from being exposed to any form of it. So I can't say we've actually seen any threats. I just think we've seen this acceleration of new adoption, but at the same time we've seen an acceleration of platforms to protect against these new trends. But fraud isn't new, as we all know, but the sophistication of the platforms to protect against it is now standard in most businesses. And so it's making their job harder and harder and harder. And my guess is that they're looking at other things that are lower hanging fruit rather than trying to beat through these really smart and sophisticated platforms that are actually doing their jobs, which is fantastic to see.
Can we provide people with an easy way to self-check where all their payment credentials are? I mean, how safe you are?
Well, I think there are functionalities or services like what I was referring to, this token cockpit from us. So that's really convenient, consumer-friendly way to do this, so that you can visually see what merchants, for example, you have saved your card, and it's really visualized, not just that there is a name of let's say merchant A or B, but there is also the logos and everything available, because that's the way how we nowadays understand our world is through different kind of visual elements. Consumers should always be very alert when they do make payment. It's same analogy, almost like with the cash. So we will really kind of look, of course, very closely and want to be sure that where our leather wallet is. So I would never put it on my back pocket. Somebody do, but that's already almost like an invite for somebody to steal it. And the same happens here in the digital world. So if you are careless, so for sure then there will be somebody who will make use out of that one. So I would say, as a conclusion, it's a combination of that there are technologies and services enabling all us to protect ourselves, but you should really look also from the how you behave, and again, this communication and education is extremely important part of the preventing fraud.
Well, that's all we've got time for today on this episode of the Paytech Show. Big thank you to our panelists and to those of you at home. Hope you have a good Christmas. Join us next year for more episodes of the Paytech Show.